Thank you, everybody, for joining us today for the overview on Sustain and Serve New Jersey, the Phase 3 application process for new applicants. I'm Caitlin Giles McCormick, and I'm going to go over just some quick housekeeping issues with today's session. All of this stuff will be readily accessible after today's session. If you have a question at any point in time during the session, you can type it in to the Q&A feature. That's the better place to put it in the chat. If you'd like to introduce yourself in the chat, you certainly can do that. But the Q&A is where we will be able to answer your questions, and you'll be able to see the answers with your question side by side, which is a little easier than a lot of times with the chat that just goes by, and things can get a little lost that way. I am going to introduce our lovely presenters today. Tara Colton is the Executive Vice President of Economic Security. She's going to be talking first, and Emily Apple will be joining us a little bit later, Program Manager for Economic Security. Tara, go ahead and take it away.
Thanks, Caitlin. Good morning, everyone. Tara Colton, really a pleasure to be here. So excited to speak with you about the next phase of Sustain and Serve. And as we kick off today's presentation, I want to give you a little context. First, just as an overview of the New Jersey Economic Development Authority, or EDA. Many of you who are joining us today are well aware of what we do, but for some of you it may be newer, and so really thrilled to be able to highlight the impact that Sustain and Serve is having and its alignment with the work that we're doing across the EDA. We are the state agency focused on driving economic growth in alignment with Governor Murphy's commitment to a stronger and fairer New Jersey. And we do a lot of different programs and strategies and initiatives, and we're very proud that Sustain and Serve is something that has grown from what was originally a $2 million pilot to what is now $45 million in programming. Also wanted just to provide a little overview about today's webinar. There are a number of folks in the webinar, many of whom I see on the list are new, which is wonderful, but I also see some familiar names, including many of our wonderful current grantees, as well as some restaurants. And I just wanted to reinforce that you're all welcome to stay and listen to us provide this detailed overview, and we're going to be getting quite technical pretty quickly. But for all of our current grantees, we are also having a webinar just for you at 12 o'clock today. And so we will be covering pretty much all of the same material. Again, you're welcome to stay on this one or do this in lieu of the one that's happening later today, but there's not really a need to sit through both if you want to preserve your time. Similarly, to the folks who are joining that may be joining on behalf of restaurants, as you'll hear as we speak more in the presentation about the structure of Sustain and Serve, the focus of today's presentation is going to be on the application process and the information required for prospective applicants, which are all nonprofits. And just to reinforce, restaurants cannot apply directly to this program to be the grantee. The grantee must be a nonprofit, and we'll be going into that in much more detail. So again, if you are with a restaurant and participating today, you're welcome to stay, but we also know how busy you all are, and so it may get fairly technical into the application process that would be less pertinent for you. So again, welcome to stay, but I wanted to manage expectations there. So I'm going to go over a few sort of big picture slides, and then Emily is going to be getting into much more detail. Just in terms of the work that we're doing at the EDA. So since the beginning of the pandemic, EDA has really committed to supporting small businesses throughout the state. And so it's quite striking that since the middle of 2020, we have awarded more than 63,000 businesses funding to address issues and challenges related to COVID, and that is more than $300 million. And that's at a broader level about what our agency does. But more specifically, we wanted to talk about the the scope of what EDA has been doing before we get into the details on sustain and serve. So, you know, the first is really, again, the scale of the small business grant programs that we've operated. We've also provided small business emergency loans. The third one here with the lovely basket of fruit you'll see is Sustain and Serve New Jersey, which again was something that was conceptualized as a $2 million pilot when we launched it. Governor Murphy announced it in the November of 2020, and we are now, as you're hearing today, moving towards what is now a total of $45 million in funding. So really just extraordinary growth. We also have operated a program for small and micro businesses around PPE, which we know was a tremendous area of need, particularly at the height of the pandemic. We do a lot of work around supporting micro, small, and mid-sized businesses, including partnering with community development financial institutions, or CDFIs. We have provided technical assistance to small businesses focused on e-commerce and being able to strengthen their business operations. And then fairly recently, one of our new programs is called the Community Stage Relief Grant, which is providing funding to performing arts venues negatively impacted by COVID. But we are here today to talk about that basket of fruit, and we'll go to the next slide. So the scale of sustain and serve continues to exceed our wildest expectations. Governor Murphy talks about this program all the time. You see him pictured here at a couple recent events. He always talks about it as first it was a home run, now it's a grand slam, as a win-win-win. Really, however you describe it, I think the impact is really powerful. And so we have seen the growth of the program over the past year become quite significant. So you'll see here that we have more than 400 restaurants that are participating or have participated in the first two phases of Sustain and Serve. When we announced the first phase, I think we had about 120 restaurants. So that's quite significant. The restaurants were, when we launched, were in 12 counties. We now have restaurants in all 21 of New Jersey's counties. We have made grants to 31 organizations over the past year, and collectively they have purchased more than, or are on track to purchase about 3.4 million meals from those restaurants. And that has been supported by about $34 million in funding. This program, we always say, is partly so impactful because it achieves so many results with each dollar spent. So with every dollar, it's helping restaurants stay open, it's helping them keep the workers employed that they, doing what they love. But what we're going to really be focusing on today is it really helps the nonprofits that are these community anchors to do the work that they have seen such an increased demand for, whether it's from folks who are experiencing food insecurity for the first time in their lives, or who may be, long struggling with hunger and not knowing where their next meal is coming from. This money bolsters the ability of those nonprofits to provide those vital services. It also creates and fosters a sense of community and connectivity. And so we just feel like every dollar spent on this has such a multiplier effect. And you'll see here a couple of the recent events that the governor attended at some of the restaurants that work with a couple of our wonderful current grantees. Before I turn it over to Emily, I wanted to just express tremendous thanks to her. I always say she's the heart and soul of Sustain and Serve, but also to two of the wonderful staff here at the EDA, Patricia Williams and Charlie O'Connor, who many of our current grantees know very, very well. They are the point people who work with them day in and day out. And part of why we're so proud of this program and feel it has gotten so much excitement and attention is because of how, with occasional hiccups, how smoothly it functions. And that's a testament to their hard work and professionalism. So really, I'm just proud to be part of the same team as them. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Emily, who's going to start talking in much more detail about what happens next.
Thank you so much, Tara. Just to reiterate, my name is Emily Apple. I'm the program manager for economic security at the EDA, and working alongside Tara, Pat, Charlie, and our entire team at NJEDA to make the Sustain and Serve program a success through phases 1, 2, and now for phase 3. So I'm going to spend much of the rest of our time together today talking through the application process and getting into the weeds with you all. As Tara said at the top, this is really a presentation that's going to be targeted toward the applicant entities, which are 501c3 and 501c19 nonprofit organizations. So if there are restaurants on this call, well, obviously you all are critical to the success of this program and key partners. Much of the content will not be focused on the restaurant requirements. So there are many resources available on our website, including a FAQ specifically targeted toward restaurants that I would encourage you to look at. But much of the content here is going to be really targeted toward applicant organizations. So the application process for Sustain and Serve is a 3-part process where the applicant, that is the nonprofit organization, completes an application to the EDA that includes the list of proposed restaurants you wish to purchase meals from. Our system then automatically generates what we call a restaurant form that is sent to the restaurants that are listed in the application. The restaurant is then required to fill out this brief form, include an attached document to verify their eligibility to participate in the program. Once the restaurant completes that form, it is sent back to you, the applicant organization, for your review and confirmation that you would like that restaurant to be included as part of your application for EDA to review. We will not review any restaurant that has not also been reviewed and confirmed by the applicant. So it is critical that you complete all 3 of these steps in advance of our deadline, which is Friday, April 1st at 5 p.m. So again, those 3 steps, and I'll outline them in depth throughout this presentation, are the nonprofit entity submits their application, the restaurant submits their form, the applicant then confirms that restaurant submission, and then it goes to the EDA to review. So all of those steps must occur before Friday, April 1st at 5 p.m. So applicant eligibility for this program is slightly different for those of you that may have participated with us in past phases. This program is eligible for 501c3 and 501c19 non-for-profit organizations that are classified under specific industry classification codes, or NAICS codes. Educational services, social assistance and healthcare, religious, grant making, civic, professional, and similar types of organizations, and public administration functions. So these encompass a broad variety of organizations. Your NAICS code does not have to be exactly 611, 62, 81392, etc. It just has to start with one of those codes. In addition, we are a recipient of federal dollars. This program is funded with $10 million through the American Rescue Plan. So we are required by federal law to check against the federal system for award management that an entity is not debarred from receiving federal funds. We also do checks with New Jersey's sister agencies, the Division of Taxation, Department of Labor and Workforce Development, to confirm that the entity is in good standing, as well as, and this is really important, an entity has to have a demonstrated track record of past meal purchases of at least 1,500 meals valued at $25,000 or more from New Jersey-based restaurants between March 9th, 2020, the start of the pandemic in New Jersey as declared by Governor Murphy's public health emergency, and March 1st, 2022. This past track record is really how we determine the capacity of organizations to participate in this program. As any of our grantees can attest to, This is an intensive program that requires a lot of coordination, support, experience. So we are looking for that track record. This has been lowered in response to public feedback. In the past, we had a track record of 3,000 meals valued at 50,000 or more. So we have lowered this. And in addition, one of the changes for phase 3 that we made is that meal donations can be counted toward your past purchase track record up to 50% of that requirement. So 750 meals, $12,500, so long as an applicant can produce invoices from the restaurant donors verifying the number of meals and the monetary value of those meals. And all of this has to be evidenced with invoices from restaurants. This can't be from individual, people who cooked meals out of the goodness of their heart and brought them to your organization, or from grocery stores. This really is focused on past purchases from restaurants or similar types of organizations. And finally, and this is a particular requirement under the American Rescue Plan, the organization has to have experienced increased costs as a result of the pandemic's impact. That's a very technical term. It can mean a lot of different things. We look at it in a very specific way that we will outline later in this presentation. So what are the eligible expenses? What can you actually spend your award on? Again, grantees are eligible to receive between $100,000 and $2 million from the EDA through this program. So what can you actually spend these funds on? I want to say at the top that all of these expenses are reimbursement based. So while we make an award of up to $2 million, it is incumbent on the grantee to go out, incur those funds, and then submit receipts and invoices to the EDA on a monthly basis for reimbursement. So we understand that not every organization is equipped to be able to take on a reimbursement-based grant. We work as hard as we can to process our reimbursements incredibly quickly, which is a real testament to Pat and Charlie and the rest of the EDA team, but it is a reimbursement-based grant. You can pay your participating restaurants up to $12 a meal. This was raised in recognition of the rising costs that restaurants are facing in providing meals through this program, and just across the country as we face supply chain shortages and rising costs. So though that $12 a meal is associated with the direct cost of meal purchases, that is everything from food and ingredients, labor, packaging, profit margin, as well as delivery fees that are charged by the restaurant, which is new in phase 3. So if a restaurant is conducting the delivery and charges a delivery fee such that the average cost per meal across the entire invoice does not exceed $12 per meal provided, we are able to pay for that newly in phase 3. The other piece that's very new in phase 3 is that up to 10% of a grant award may be used toward operational costs that are incurred by the grantee organization, the nonprofit, that are associated with delivering the services provided through Sustain and Serve. These are limited to very specific categories, such as staff salaries and fringe, proportionate to the amount of staff time that's actually dedicated to the program, mileage for the meals deliveries, if the nonprofit organization is conducting the meal pickup and deliveries, payments to vendors that assist with the monitoring of all of these invoices, receipts, or any other groups that are helping to implement the program, as well as supplies needed to operate the program. The prohibitions, we tend to be quite broad on how the meals are distributed, where they are distributed. We really want to give community-based organizations, nonprofit organizations that are working within communities, the flexibility. They know their communities best, and we want to make sure that you are best positioned to be able to distribute those meals in the way that works best for your community. But there are a couple prohibitions that we have. Grantees cannot resell any of the meals purchased with grant funding, and you cannot distribute meals to paid staff of the grantee organization if you're using this as a volunteer thank you, that's okay. If you're distributing this to staff of other organizations, that's okay. If you are giving meals to your staff to then distribute and give to others as part of their line of duty, that's okay. But paid staff cannot themselves be the recipients of the meals to consume the meals. So for any restaurants that are still with us, participating restaurant eligibility, we do review on a couple criteria based on what you submit through the restaurant form, as well as what we do through the sister agency checks with our respective agencies in New Jersey state government. You have to be an entity classified under NAICS code 722, which is food services and drinking places. And new in phase 3 is community meal social services. I'm going to put a pin in that and get back to that. Restaurants have to have 50 or fewer full-time equivalent employees based on your most recently filed WR30 with the New Jersey Department of Labor and Workforce Development. So please make sure that your most recent WR30 is on file. We will be looking at the fourth quarter of 2021 at this point. If you have fewer than one full-time equivalent employee, you are not required to file a WR30. So we will be collecting an IRS Form 1040 that just verifies that. The restaurant has to have a physical commercial location in New Jersey, be in operation as of June 4th, 2021, which was the end of Governor Murphy's first public health emergency, and attest that they have been negatively impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic, as we know so many restaurants have. In addition to the other good standing checks that we do with our sister agencies, if you are regulated by the Division of Alcohol and Beverage Control, we have to check on that, as well as the Division of Taxation. So please make sure that you are current on any tax filings that need to be done, as well as the Department of Labor. Check against the Federal System for Award Management to ensure the entity is not debarred from receiving federal funds, as well as a current and valid health inspection certificate. So that's the sanitary inspection certificate or sanitary inspection report that a restaurant receives from the local health department, indicating a rating of satisfactory, and this has to be from 2020 or later. Specifically as it relates to these community meal social service organizations, because if you notice on the slide for applicant eligibility, entities under NAICS code 62 are also eligible for this program. So community meal social service providers, which are entities like Meals on Wheels, specialty catering companies that service congregate facilities, are eligible to serve as either a participating restaurant or a grantee or applicant. If your organization falls into this category, you have to pick one of those two lanes. You cannot serve as both an applicant and a participating restaurant under phase 3 of Sustain and Serve. So if there are organizations that fall under that category that want to talk through the specifics, we would encourage you to reach out to us via email to figure out exactly what the best fit is for your organization. The documents that are required of the applicant when you are submitting the application, you are required to submit a tax clearance certificate from the New Jersey Division of Taxation that is dated within the past 6 months and lists the New Jersey Economic Development Authority. You can access this through our NJ Premier Business Services Hub. There's also a detailed instruction on how exactly you do that in our FAQs that are available on our website. So I would encourage folks to look at that FAQ document to find out exactly the steps for getting the tax clearance certificate. You are also required to produce invoices and receipts demonstrating past meal purchases of at least 1,500 meals, $25,000. And again, part of these can be from donations. We're going to go over exactly what these invoices need to look like, much more. The new things in phase 3 are because this is now limited to 501c3 and 501c19 nonprofits, you are required to submit a document verifying your nonprofit status. There's a number of ways you can do that, whether your IRS determination letter, IRS Form 990, your proof of charity registration with the New Jersey Division of Charities. So there are multiple ways that you can do that. And now I want to focus on some of the increased costs that I mentioned earlier in the presentation. We are looking at what an organization's increased costs were due to the pandemic. That can be evidenced by decline in revenue, your increase in service levels. There's a number of different ways that this is measured per the regulations in the American Rescue Plan, our federal funding source. What we are looking to collect on this is really looking at your 990 filings from 2019 and 2020, or your organizational financial statements that help evidence this. So you are required, if you were an organization that was founded prior to the pandemic, prior to February 15th, 2020, you must submit your 990 filings for 2019 and 2020. For organizations founded after February 15th, we understand that there are a number of organizations that really were created in response to the pandemic to be able to purchase meals from restaurants, distribute them to people in need, distribute them to frontline workers. We understand that is a category of organizations. So what you will be asked for is just that 990 filing from 2020, as well as any additional, as well as your organizational mission statement that sort of speaks to your mission to respond directly to COVID-19. So one of the core requirements for qualifying for Sustain and Serve is verification of your past purchase history. So again, you had to have purchased at least 1,500 meals valued at $25,000 or more from New Jersey-based restaurants between March 9th, 2020, the start of the pandemic, and March 1st, 2022, the start of our application period. So we are going to be asking for and looking at in great detail all of the invoices, receipts that you've collected for meal purchases during this period from New Jersey-based restaurants. And we're going to be looking for a few points on these invoices. So at minimum, in order to be able to count toward your past purchase history, you need to have an invoice that includes the restaurant name, the date of purchase, the description of the purchase, the quantity purchased, and the total cost. And that's for us to be able to verify that the meal purchase was made within this period from a New Jersey-based restaurant and have some idea of what was purchased. And again, up to 50% of that past purchase history can come from donated restaurant meals. Again, as we appreciate the outpouring of support that so many organizations received from individuals, from all sorts of other entities donating food, but this is really a program focused on purchasing meals from restaurants. So we're looking for those past meal purchases to have come from restaurants, and that includes the donations. Your award calculation. So you can request anywhere between $100,000 and $2 million to be able to fund meal purchases through Sustain and Serve. So, and we'll go through this as we do the application walkthrough, but you can put in your grant request between $100,000 and $2 million, and then request up to 10% of that amount be put toward operational costs. So for example, if you are requesting $2 million, up to $200,000 of that can be dedicated toward your organization's operational costs associated with the implementation of the program. That will give you the balance that's remaining for meal purchases, which is the bulk, or 90% of an award is going to go toward actually going out and purchasing meals from New Jersey-based restaurants. We'll then ask you to put in your projected average cost per meal in order to create a projection on the number of meals that you'll purchase through this program. We're asking folks to base their grant request on projections of meal purchases beginning at the beginning of June and lasting through December of 2022. Before we start walking through the application, I'm going to pause and take questions. I know there have been a number that have been coming in through the Q&A and the chat. I don't know, Caitlin, if you want to help read those out.
Emily, can I ask you there's a couple, we've been trying to keep up with some of these, but there are a couple where, in one I actually just wrote, Emily will advise more, because I didn't want to misstate it. So I know there have been a number of questions around who's eligible. So just to reiterate, the grant that is made, the $100,000 to $2 million, can only be made to a nonprofit. And there's eligible nonprofits, and there's specific criteria. The nonprofit can then purchase meals from eligible restaurants, which are defined very specifically. So there was a question I saw about, are grocery stores eligible? The answer is no, if they are not, maybe there's a restaurant in a grocery store, and if that has its own tax ID, then perhaps that restaurant of the grocery store would be eligible, but the grocery store itself would not be eligible. That's not an eligible entity. We also heard a bunch of questions about where this is eligible. Just to reiterate, this is all 21 counties, all nonprofits in all 21 counties are eligible, and restaurants to be purchased from in all 21 counties. There are no geographic limitations. We heard a lot of questions around how restaurants can reach out to participating grantees, and we shared the restaurant registry form that folks can submit into. So those were some of the FAQs that I saw. A couple of the ones that I wanted you to weigh in on. One was there was a question about gift cards, whether we can use funds. Let me just tell you a couple of them, whether they can use funds to purchase restaurant gift cards. There's one about whether the eligible uses could cover the cost of alternative packaging, since there's now a ban on single-use bags, et cetera. And I answered that one that yes, if it's part of the direct cost of meal purchase. Okay, I thought I had that right. Thank you for confirming. And then the other one that I was hoping you could talk a bit more about, or tell people how we will provide more information about, was a question that we know is going to be a common scenario, which was an organization that spent more in services but also raised more funds because of the increased demand for services, and what that would mean in terms of documenting the impact. And my response was that if you had increased levels of demand for program services, even if you raised additional funds, there are also increased costs as a result of COVID. And so that would, again, there's specifics that you'll need to walk through in the application, et cetera, but that would, broadly speaking, be eligible. So those were the ones that I've seen so far that I was hoping you could, the packaging, you confirmed I got it right. The gift cards and the increased cost, if you want to say a little more about that.
Great. So for gift cards, that's a really excellent question. Thank you to the person that asked that. There's some ambiguity within the American Rescue Plan regulations that we need to clarify. So I don't want to give you a wrong answer. So if someone on our team could take down that person's information, our team can get back to you, and we'll also update our FAQs with that specifically. I just don't want to give a wrong answer here. As to increased costs, we certainly understand that there are likely a number of organizations that saw increased fundraising as a result of the pandemic. There was such an outpouring of support from so many communities. This program is a response to so many of the wonderful things we saw happening on the ground. But we also recognize that the the support that organizations received was not commensurate with the need. There's a lot of data out there to back that up. So we will be looking at your 990s very closely to be able to determine that. We understand that your service levels likely went up astronomically during COVID. So any documentation around that from 2019 to 2020, if you do not feel that your 990s speak to that, we can look into ways that organizations can submit supplementary information on top of that as part of the application. But we recognize that we've tried to define increased costs broadly enough such that most nonprofits that are serving individuals have faced these increased costs due to the pandemic. And you'll see as we walk through the application, there's a number of ways we've defined that. So the 990 should evidence that in some way, and you can also submit any supplementary documentation to be able to respond to that.
Can I flag a couple more for you?
Yep.
Sorry, were you wrapping up? Or you?
No, I was about to. I saw that there was a question about donated food. Again, donated meals can count toward your past purchase history up to 50% of that history. So up to 750 meals or $12,500, whichever comes first. And those meals that were donated need to have come from a restaurant or a catering company or a similar entity. It could not have come from individuals. It could not have come from grocery stores, from, other entities that were donating food. So it really had to come from a restaurant, and the restaurant would need to provide an invoice that documents the quantity of meals donated and the monetary value of those meals, so we can begin to count that toward your past purchase track record in order to be eligible for the program.
Great. There was a question also, which I answered, about whether a 501c3 that wouldn't qualify on its own could partner with another one that could qualify. And my response was that there can only be a grant to one nonprofit for any individual grant from EDA. So we know of many of our current grantees that they are nonprofits that then work with many other local nonprofits in their communities to distribute meals, or that they may bring the meals to that nonprofit's clients, but the funds can only go to and be paid for expenses at the grantee. Am I getting that right, Emily?
That's correct.
In case folks can't tell, I run all my complicated answers by Emily because she's the real expert here.
No, that's absolutely right.
Okay. There was again the question around the donated meals and the eligible. I think you've given a lot of clarity on how we're considering the donated meals as part of a proof of eligibility. Can you clarify the eligible sources of those donated meals? I understood, it was clear you said that it can't be that people paid for it out of their own, local community members cooked a meal and brought it. It has to be from a restaurant. Yeah. Can you explain if there are requirements on what those donating restaurants needed to have? Number of employees? There was a question about like a corporate cafeteria.
No, we certainly understand that these donations in many cases were made before Sustain and Serve ever existed. So we're not putting a cap on the number of employees. We're not doing taxation checks on those those donor restaurants. They just need to be an entity that is classified under NAICS code 722, food services and drinking places, which is quite a broad category. So catering companies, food trucks, corporate cafeterias, I believe would fall under, if they have their own sort of, if they're operated by like a catering company. So the category is quite broad, but it just can't be from individuals that are donating out of the goodness of their heart, as much as we appreciate that, or from entities like grocery stores or specialty food stores.
Great. There's, I'm sort of scanning through, there was a question about if the estimated cost per meal, actually, let's hold on that one because that's more about the application process. Someone said if we will not have close to 100,000 in expenses for meals from now through December 2022, then we are not eligible to apply for this grant. Is that correct?
That's a great question. No, we really are focused on entities that are able to make bulk meal purchases and distribution between June and December of this year. So if you do not believe that your organization will be able to successfully spend $100,000, we would not recommend applying for this grant. We're really looking for organizations that have the capacity to spend and distribute at least $100,000.
Emily, there's also a question about if there are organizations that have a conflict of interest where someone sits on a nonprofit board or is a member of an organization and owns a restaurant, how are we ensuring no conflict of interest exists? I will say, I think that's something where we probably will get back with a more formal answer, because neither Emily nor I are lawyers, so we don't want to get this wrong. But the criteria that we've laid out in the eligibility for the restaurants is in relationship to the sort of, you know, the restaurant itself's suitability for the program in terms of number of employees, et cetera, you know, having all of that paperwork that Emily walked through in terms of, you know, clearances, et cetera. We do have methods in our standard operating procedures regarding the relationship between a grantee and a restaurant if they are the owner, I believe. But I think, Emily, do you have more to say on this? Otherwise, I think we'll get back in writing.
Yeah, I think we can get back more in writing. We certainly understand that there are entities in the state where, you know, we also have seen restaurant owners have really stepped up about and recognizing food insecurity as an issue and actually spearheading initiatives to be able to donate meals to members of their community that are facing food insecurity. So we understand that those entities exist, and you know, in most of those cases that we know of, they are working with a network of restaurants. We certainly understand the concern around conflicts of interest and can sort of consult with folks that are more legally minded to make sure that we get the right language for you on that. Are there any other questions that I should answer now, or should I proceed with the application walkthrough and then we'll take questions again at the end?
I think we can cover the ones that are in the Q&A right now.
Okay. So I'm seeing if you have specific questions about my organization has been purchasing meals from this type of entity, or my organization does this, I would highly recommend you reach out to ssnj@njeda.com with those specific questions, and a member of our team can work with you to figure out exactly the right scenario and talk through your specific case. I see, does the estimated cost per meal include the cost of meals invoiced by the restaurant and equipment used to package, deliver the meals, or does the equipment fall under the operational costs? The operational costs are incurred by the grantee organization. So if the restaurant is using equipment to package the meal, that would fall under the restaurant's allowable $12 per meal. So that would not, but if let's say we have a restaurant that gives a grantee organization trays of food, really large trays, and you as the grantee organization want to package that into individual meals, that because the grantee is incurring that cost, the nonprofit organization, that would fall under your operational costs or your 10% of the award. And then if a hospital has purchased bulk meals, would the affiliated hospital foundation be eligible to apply, or would it need to be the hospital itself? If the foundation has been, let me actually ask our legal team on that and get back to you, because I don't want to give the wrong answer. And again, if there are specific questions to your organization, we encourage you to reach out ssnj@njeda.com to be able to do some of that specific scenario planning together.
Emily, I'm typing a response on one question. I just want to emphasize that there was a question about that said, since the grantee has to have received previous EDA grants with requirements for a certain number of meals purchased or donated, that by default creates a pool of eligible nonprofits for phase 3. I understand the question. That statement is not quite right, and I wanted to clarify it, which is that certainly all of the nonprofits that have participated in Sustain and Serve phases 1 and 2 are at least partly eligible because they have demonstrated track records. They are not automatically eligible. So to all you Sustain and Serve grantees who are listening, you all still need to reapply, and we still need to go through the review and approval process. So they're not guaranteed funding or automatically reapproved or anything like that. That was the same situation from Sustain and Serve phase 1 to phase 2. But I also wanted to clarify that the meal purchases that the nonprofit has to demonstrate in order to apply for this program now, that can have been done completely separate. You could have never interacted with EDA before. It could have been something the nonprofit did completely on its own. So they do not have to have received funding from us previously. We had some nonprofits, for example, that applied in phase 2 that had not worked with us in phase 1 and had just met the eligibility criteria because they had done the purchasing on their own. So I'll put that in the Q&A as well, but wanted to just clarify that.
Great. And then just the other piece of that question I see is, can the EDA list those eligible nonprofits? If you want to look at the grantee organizations that received funds in phase 1 and phase 2, again, that is not a guarantee they will be participating in phase 3, but to give you an idea of what those entities are available on our website. I think with that, I want to be respectful of everyone's time and recognizing we only have 10 minutes left. I want to make sure that we have time to go through the application. I'll do this relatively quickly since we covered most of this, but that way when you begin the application, you'll have some familiarity with what this looks like. Just a quick point on the technical side, this is not an application platform where you're able to log in and return to the application. This has to be done in one sitting. So we encourage you to gather all your documents, have everything ready to go once you sit down to begin the application, because you will not be able to return to it. If you close out of the window without submitting, you'll have to start again from scratch. We recognize that's not ideal, but this is the constraint of our technical platform. So at the top, you'll see that there is a welcome page. We encourage you to read the instructions thoroughly. There are links to be able to help you access many of the required documents. There's a list of the required documents for you at the top. So you'll see this and you'll be asked to affirm that you've read these directions. Next slide. The first thing that you will be required to put in is your employer identification number, or EIN. That's the 9-digit federal tax ID that's associated with your organization, as well as entering your entity type. So 501c3 and 501c19 are the only types of organizations that are eligible to receive funding under Sustain and Serve. That will then prompt you to upload your 501c3 or 501c19 verification document. Again, that can be your IRS letter of determination, a 990 filing, proof of charity registration. So there are multiple ways that you can evidence your 501c3 status. And then you will be required to enter your NAICS code. If you do not know your NAICS code, that's okay. We have a nice, it's not pictured here, but we have a system of categories and drop-down menus to be able to help you drill down onto exactly what your NAICS code is. And as a reminder, there are limited NAICS code categories that are eligible for this grant. So please consult our grant guidelines to look at exactly what those NAICS codes are. You'll then be asked to enter some basic information about your organization. What is your legal name? If you have a doing business as, your website, your address, your mailing address. If you are a religiously affiliated organization or your organization engages in lobbying or political activities, that is not a disqualifier by any means, but you are required to complete an additional questionnaire detailing your religious or political activity that we at NJEDA are required to collect and review. But again, those are not disqualifying criteria at all. And then you will also be required to upload a tax clearance certificate from the New Jersey Division of Taxation. There are detailed instructions in our FAQ around how you can obtain that, as well as a link to the New Jersey Division of Taxation on the application itself. Next slide. This is where you will be asked to detail your COVID impact. So this is defined as beginning in March 9th, 2020. As you can see, there are multiple ways that you can evidence this: increased levels of service demand and delivery, uncompensated increases in service need, decreased revenue, and challenges covering payroll and other operating costs. You'll then be asked about the date your organization was in operation, and based on that answer, you'll have different options of the types of files that you will be required to upload or the questions that you'll be asked. Please provide us the authorized representative for your organization that we will be communicating with through the application process. This email address that you provide is the primary mode of contact we'll use throughout the application, so please ensure that's spelled correctly. I realize that might seem quite silly, but we have had issues with that in the past, and applications not going all the way through because of that. Applicants are also asked to list all the federal aid they've received since March 9th, 2020, directly related to COVID-19. So if your organization applied for the Paycheck Protection Program, for example, if you received an NJEDA Small Business Emergency Grant, if you've received aid through the CARES Act from your local county, if you are a food bank that received federal aid through the New Jersey Department of Agriculture, all of that will need to be accounted for. These are not disqualifying criteria by any means, but we do need to account for it. So please have the information regarding your past federal funding receipt ready when you fill out the application. This will include your status, whether you approved for the funding, whether you've received it, the amount of funding you received, the date you received it, as well as the purpose of the funds. This page in the application will ask for a brief description of your organization. We just want to learn more about you and where you're coming from, the type of work that you do, and detailing your past meal purchasing activity. This can include the donations as well. So you'll be asked to give the name of the restaurant that you purchase meals from, their address, as well as the number of meals purchased and the total amount spent. And you can list this up to $25,000 and 12,000 and 1,500 meals. We need both of those criteria to be met. It can't be either 1,500 meals or $25,000. So it's whichever's the greater of the two. So maybe you were purchasing meals for $10 a meal, then you would need to show 2,500 meal purchases, not 1,500 meal purchases, in order to make that $25,000 threshold. And then you will be asked to upload, so you will be required to list the restaurants as well as upload all of the receipts and invoices that document what you've told us. And we at the EDA are required to check that everything you told us matches up with a receipt or invoice. So please be sure to provide us as many invoices to get to that $25,000, 1,500 meal threshold. We will be coming back to you if there are not enough invoices or there's a lack of clarity on the invoices. We try to be as flexible as possible in accepting invoices. We've accepted everything from Post-it notes, back of napkins, scribbled by hand, so long as it meets the criteria that we outlined on the prior slide in terms of having the restaurant name, the date, the description of meal purchase, we can accept it. But this is where we've seen some problems in the past, so we really ask you to make sure that your invoices are in good shape, that you work with your participating restaurants to get those invoices. And again, these can be anywhere from March 9th, 2020, all the way up to March 1st, 2022. And we will be asking a couple questions just around sort of how did you select your restaurants? what did how did you work with your participating restaurants? How did you manage meal distribution? Just to get a better understanding of your program. This is the grant request page. So this is where you will type in how much money you want from us, $100,000 to $2 million. You'll be asked if your organization has increased costs. That's again, this very technical term that comes to us from our federal regulators, directly related to the services performed. If you project that your organization is going to incur costs associated with the implementation of Sustain and Serve, you should answer yes to this question. If you answer no, then by default, all of the money that you will have available for your grant request will be to make meal purchases, not available to you as an organization to support your own costs. And again, your operational costs can be up to 10% of that total grant request. And you'll see that there's a space that there's an automatic calculation of how much funding is available for meal purchases. And then based on that and the average cost per meal that you put in, we will generate an estimated number of meals purchased. And again, you should be projecting this from June 2022 through the end of December 2022. Restaurants, all applicants are required, all new applicants are required to list a restaurant that you wish to work with. Through Sustain and Serve, you must have at least one restaurant complete this. So please make sure that their email is put in properly, so that they actually will receive the information from the EDA. Once you press submit, based on the list that you submit here, a form will be sent to every single restaurant listed here for them to complete and you to review. Next slide. You'll be asked to complete a legal questionnaire and certification. Please read this in depth. If there are any questions that you answer yes to on this legal questionnaire, you will have an opportunity to provide documentation around the nature of the offense, and our legal team will review that as part of the eligibility review. You'll be asked to certify your application electronically. You'll see a summary of what you are requesting. You'll be asked to input your EIN again, and then you'll press submit. And once you press submit, next slide, you'll receive this notification that your application has been received, and you'll have a PDF that you can save for your records. This again is just a summary of this process as I've described it, that you, the applicant, complete this application. The listed restaurants then are required to fill out a form. Again, that'll come from ssnj@njeda.com. We've heard a number of restaurants have had this go directly to their spam. So if you hear from your restaurant, hey, I never got a form, ask them to check their spam first. But you can always email us at ssnj@njeda.com if you're having any issues. Once the restaurant completes their form, that is resubmitted to you. It comes back to you as the applicant. And then once you click on that link in the email and confirm their submission, it comes to us at EDA for review. So we recognize that this is a long process. So we encourage folks to get started early. Our application, all steps must be completed by April 1st at 5 p.m.
If anybody does have a question they want to ask live, it looks like we're in pretty decent shape with the formal questions that have been dropped in the Q&A. Somebody already knows they want to raise your hand. And we will call you and be able to allow you to speak. And Penelope Lopez has a question. You should be able to unmute yourself, Penelope, and go ahead and ask your question.
Is there a reason why once you approve one restaurant, it just can't be used for everybody versus it being individualized to your grant?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. Thank you for asking it. It was something that we really wanted to change for phase 3, but unfortunately, just due to some of the legal and procedural constraints of our funding source, of the sort of operational realities, we cannot do that. It has to be approved on a grantee by grantee basis.
All right. Okay. We press on, we move forward. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm not seeing anybody else with their hands raised. I don't know, Emily, if you've got
I
any.
see two questions that have come
Yep.
in through the Q&A. For previous grantees who already participated, do they have to fill out these forms again? The answer is yes. We do require that previous applicants reapply. There is not an automatic eligibility determination made. As Tara said at the top, there is going to be a webinar later on today specifically for our phase 2 grantees to talk through some of the questions are asked slightly differently. Some of the documentation is slightly different, but you are required to reapply and eligibility is not guaranteed. So yes, previous grantees, we will have more to say to you later on this afternoon. I see another question. We received donated product from a restaurant in 2021 in about 8K for food we use to deliver meals. Do we qualify to apply? Again, I would say if there are specific questions for your organization, we would encourage you to reach out to snj@njeda.com and our staff can respond to you about the particular situation. You know, as if you have $8,000 in donations and can otherwise evidence that you have $25,000 in past meal purchases with other sources of funding, then potentially you're eligible to apply. But you know, I would encourage you to reach out to our team. And this is an excellent question. Thank you. Do we have to use the same restaurant, presumably that you either purchased meals from in the past or donated the meals again in your application? No, you can use a totally different set of restaurants. If you list restaurants you want to work with in the future and you've never worked with them before, that's absolutely fine. If the restaurants that donated food or you purchased meals from in the past have since closed, we understand that's the case for many of the organizations that we've worked with. It's a very unfortunate circumstance, but there's no obligation that you had to have worked with those restaurants in the past in order to work with them through Sustain and Serve. Do farmers count? The farm would have to have some sort of associated restaurant or similar entity that's classified under this NAICS code 6722 or 624210. I might be getting that wrong, the Community Meals Social Services. So it has to be within one of those two NAICS codes in order to apply. And I think generally a farm on its own doesn't qualify, but there are certainly farms that have like associated restaurants and things that may be able to apply. I'm not seeing any other questions coming in through the Q&A or the chat. Caitlin, do we have any raised hands?
We do not currently.
All right. Well, I appreciate everyone's patience staying on with us a little bit later. We really appreciate it. Again, if you have questions specifically about your situation, you can email ssnj@njeda.com and a member of our team will respond. We really appreciate everyone taking the time and for your commitment to supporting food security throughout New Jersey. And we hope to receive applications from many of the organizations that came today. So thank you so much.